Hi everybody! This video discusses imagery, which is the focus of our quiz and our discussions for this week. When talking about literature, we use the term image or imagery to refer to language that addresses the senses. The most common images in poetry are visual, and this is probably what you think of when you hear the term image or imagery. However, images can also address other senses. So the sense of touch, the sense of sight, already said sight, the sense of hearing, the sense of taste, the sense of smell. So all of the senses can be engaged in imagery. And to demonstrate this, I want to look at an example from Lee Ho's poem, A Beautiful Girl Combs Her Hair. So I'll begin by just reading the poem aloud, and as I'm reading it, I want you to yourself, try to think about some of the ways in which this poem engages different senses. So what are words or phrases that appeal to different kinds of senses? From A Beautiful Girl Combs Her Hair. Awake at dawn, she's dreaming by cool silk curtains, fragrance of spilling hair, half sandalwood, half aloes, windlass creaking at the well, singing jade. Okay, so here are some of the words and phrases that I immediately identified as appealing to the senses. The first one is the word dawn, which appeals to the sense of sight. When we hear the word dawn, we think of sort of, a sunrise and the kind of colors that come with that. I also saw the phrase cool silk curtains as appealing to the sense of touch. When I hear that, I imagine what it's like to sort of stroke silk curtains and sort of the coolness of that, touching that. I also identified two phrases, one phrase and two words actually, as appealing to the sense of smell. So the phrase fragrance of spilling hair, and then the word sandalwood and aloes. So that first one asked you to sort of imagine what hair smells like, and I specifically imagined what sort of like freshly washed hair smells like. And then sandalwood is a very strong scent, and then aloe is also a fairly strong scent. So those appeal to my sense of smell. And then finally, in that last stanza, there are two phrases that to me also appealed to my senses, and in this case, my sense of hearing. So the first of these was a windlass creaking. So I imagined what a windlass, which is the kind of sort of contraption that you use to sort of pull something up. So it's sort of like a simple gear they would use to sort of pull a bucket up from a well. So imagine what that sort of sounds like, creaking, sort of the ropes creaking against the wood or the metal or whatever that windlass is made of. And then also the phrase singing jade, which I don't really know what jade sounds like, but when I hear that, I try to imagine what it sounds like, because we have that word singing, which encourages me to sort of try to imagine what that sounds like. So what we see happening here altogether is a poem that gives us this sort of vivid sensory experience of what this one sort of girl sort of experiences in the morning when she sort of wakes up and goes through some of her chores. And then I also want to take a look at a second poem that uses a lot of imagery and does it in maybe sort of a slightly different way. So this is the poem Cavalry Crossing a Ford by Walt Whitman. And once again, I'll go ahead and read it. And as I'm reading it, I again want you to pay attention to the language and to the phrases, and try to identify places where it's engaging your senses, whether that's your sense of sight, your sense of sound, or other sense of hearing, or other kinds of senses that you have. Cavalry crossing a ford. A line in a long array where they wind betwixt green islands. They take a serpentine course, their arms flash in the sun, hark to the musical clank. Behold the silvery river, in it the splashing horse, loitering, stop to drink. Behold the brown-faced men, each group, each person a picture, the negligent rest on saddles. Some emerge on the opposite bank. Others are just entering the ford, while scarlet and blue and snowy white, The guidon flags flutter gaily in the wind. Okay, so on this page, I've highlighted some of the words that I saw as sort of appealing to my senses. And then I've also highlighted some other words that I saw sort of connecting to an overall theme that I saw in the poem. And I'll just sort of begin to work my way through the poem and explain each of those. So in the first line of the poem, line 1, I highlighted the word wind and betwixt and green islands. So if we read the whole line, it says, a line in long array where they wind between green islands. And I saw green islands as being a especially sort of vivid visual image because we have that color, so we can sort of imagine what those green islands look like. And then I also found that word wind to be particularly vivid because we have this sort of, what I see is all this sort of serpentine imagery happening in this poem, and this is the first place where we sort of see that come up. So there's a line that's sort of winding along, and that's sort of the first place where I see that kind of serpentine or image coming. And then the second line, we see this come up again. So he says they take a serpentine course. So, it's almost sort of comparing this line of people that's winding along, winding through islands into a river, comparing that to sort of like a snake. And you can sort of imagine what that looks like. And then their arms flash in the sun, which I saw as being this sort of strong visual image. You can sort of see what their sort of rifles and other sort of armaments would look like flashing in the sun. And then hark to the musical clank. So I saw that as being a sort of a sound imagery, sort of imagining what sort of the clank and the music of all of those sort of soldiers moving together, what that sounds like. And then in these next two lines, the speaker actually tells us to sort of imagine what this looks like. So we have the word behold, which is imagining us to sort of like call to our sort of imagination what this looks like. So he says, behold the silvery river, which I see as this visual image. In it, the splashing horses, which to me is a visual image, but also kind of a sound image as well, sort of imagining what that sounds like. And then in the next line, behold the brown-faced men. So again, this sort of visual imagery, starting to imagine sort of the faces of these men and sort of a color. And then again, the speaker tells us to imagine, each group, each person a picture, just so to actually sort of see that and think of them as these sort of visual pictures. And then if we move down to the very end of the poem, and we also have this other sort of strong imagery. So scarlet and blue and snowy white, all of these sort of colors that the poem invites us to imagine. And then the guidon flags flutter gaily in the wind, which is also, I see as sort of the strong visual image, inviting us to sort of imagine what this theme looks like. So sort of taken together, this poem can in some ways almost be argued, you can argue that it's what sometimes people call a picture poem, and that it asks the reader to sort of imagine something sort of as a picture in their mind. And then as part of that picture, there's also all this sort of serpentine imagery that pokes up. So like I said, the soldiers winding through the islands like a serpent, and then you can see that the actual structure of the poem, the way the poem is shaped, also kind of mimics that imagery. So you can see that the lines sort of wind on the page. So that sort of that imagery that asks us to sort of imagine is also reinforced by the way the words are arranged on the page and the ways that the words are ordered on the page. So that is a short introduction to imagery. In your discussion for this week, I'm going to ask you to spend some time looking at imagery and other poems. So I look forward to seeing what you have to say about it.